My challenge would be to answer the question, what do you really want? And what's holding you back from going for it? Don't be afraid of conflict. Conflict is a great opportunity, for the learning to get to a new place, to get to an answer that you had envisaged, to take a relationship.
Hello, grown-ups, and welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up with me, your host, Sam Cooper-Gray. This week, we welcome Christine Quinn Brown to be interviewed. And Christine has had a really interesting journey across a number of continents, across international languages and finance, and then going and running her own business and writing her own book. So please join me in welcoming her to the podcast. So, Christine, I'm going to kick off with the first question, and that is, tell us a little bit about your journey into adulthood.
Into adulthood. So from the age of 18 sort of onwards, or before?
Or just the things that formed you. What are the big things that's happened in your life that formed you? Tell us a little bit maybe about where you grew up.
Yeah. Okay. So things that formed me. I would say that I came from a very modest background. I grew up in outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey. Entrepreneur, dad, set up his own business, which now looking back, I think his work ethic and um, his ability and to take risks really set a good example for me. So, and he used to have this saying in the house, there's no such thing as security, only opportunity, right? So this is in the 70s and 80s. I mean, now how true is that, right?
Yeah.
So that I think that really formed me. My mom suffered from MS since I was young, and I think that for me as it was a positive experience in that my mother was very present and was a advocate in everything that I did, and I saw that she was incredibly resilient no matter what the situation. She always had a smile on her face. And so again, I think, looking back as an adult, I think she set the example of whatever your situation, you can make something out of it, and you can be, you can find happiness. So I think those, the parents obviously were really played a big part in terms of who I was. And this theme of risk taking and also not following maybe the path that others followed uh, became evident in my own life at a very early age. I was thinking about this before the podcast that I remember when I was played hockey. So a thing that for me as well is sport. Always
Right.
loved sport. Was in basketball, ran track and field, um, uh, and I just loved it. Running, um, and my hockey team. I think it was my 16th or 17th birthday. I think it was the 16th birthday. They gave me a plaque, and this plaque says it's the quote from Thoreau. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. This is at 16. And so
Wow.
others saw that I was different as well. The other thing that I did that was unusual, again, very, very, kind of small town that I grew up in, I decided to apply for a scholarship to study to study wherever through the Rotary Club. Won a scholarship to study in Sweden. And because I had such an interest in foreign languages in high school, I was taking several additional languages. You only had to take one language for like 2 semesters or something was a requirement. And I had to go to the guidance counselor's office to get an exception for taking additional foreign languages. She said, "This is a waste of time. Why are you doing this?" So it turned out that because I had taken these extra credits for the 3 years of my 4 years of high school, I had enough credits to graduate in 3 years. So
Wow.
so I was able to then go to Sweden and that created a different path, again, because I was able to, within 3 months, participate in classes. And that, I think, experience and recommendations from teachers got me into one of the best language schools in the U.S., which was Georgetown University. So, and I only applied to one school. To me, like, that's where I wanted to go. Best language program, and it was cosmopolitan. So again, like, I didn't follow what you were supposed to do.
So there was
So,
clearly a
so yeah, I think
tenacity there from an early age.
exactly, exactly.
So you went off to university in Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about the journey on from there because you've had a really interesting career.
Sure. So again at university, so it's a German major, French minor, and at Georgetown it's a liberal arts program. So you're studying philosophy and theology and sociology, really well-rounded. And as a language major, it was common that you would spend a year abroad. So Georgetown had a program and to study in Germany. There were a number of programs. I think there were three in Germany. But I thought, well, why should I pay why should I pay tuition to Georgetown to organize this? The German embassy was only like 4 blocks off of campus. Why don't I walk down to the embassy and apply directly to university? So that's what I did. And at the same time, I asked for information about becoming an au pair. And they said, nein, das ist nicht möglich. You can't study at university and be an au pair. That's two different things. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I got the information. And as it turned out, a family was looking for somebody to help their kids with their homework. So they weren't looking for somebody that didn't know, any German. So I ended up I had the placement with the family before I knew that had been accepted into university. And my parents were like, "Oh, so well, how's this university thing working out?" Yeah, 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 it's all sorted, right? So I go to Germany, and it's not until because I had to decide which cities and then apply to the university and the families within
Mm.
those towns, right? So I went to Cologne, was there a month before university started. And when I was there, I received news that I had successfully gotten into Cologne University. So again, I didn't follow the common path, and I was able to get free room and board. And the family agreed that my classes took priority, so they worked kind of around my schedule. Um, so yeah, so then at university, and I guess the final example of not following the common path was I signed up my senior year to a course in German into English translation. And I go to this course, and after class, I think the second class, the professor wants to talk to me. And she said, "This is a master's class. You're an undergraduate. What are you doing in this class? You're not going to get an A." So she looked me up. She's you have a high grade point average. And I said, "This is the most useful course in terms of post university, in terms of getting a job. So I don't care about I care about my grade point average, but this is more important." So I was able to continue with the class, and in the end got the certification. And that then led to the career path. I actually was a translator when I came out of university. Interesting work. Then I got involved in admin roles in international companies. But then I started getting the itch, Sam. Like, this is like a side deal, this side gig. I want to be like where the business is happening, right? So, so I started to get an itch to maybe do an MBA to kind of pivot, right? So that's how I made the first pivot. So, I I was able to, well, first of all, come to the UK for the first time in the late 80s, for 2 years. My other half had an opportunity to work in London, so we sought this as a couple to have this experience to work abroad, and I could work on his work permit. So that started my history in the UK. So day one, so okay, so now we're moving from risk theme to networking. Day one, I had one contact in the UK. Called them the first week. It was the daughter of somebody I had worked with in Washington. And I said, "Hey, I'm here for 2 years. I really, I want to work." And she said, "Well, interesting. Just joined this company called BRI. We're a business information firm, and we're hiring conference managers. So these are people that go out into the business, talk to executives, and figure out what do people need to know." So I know for some of our listeners, they'll be like, "What? You can't go online?" Do you remember the days like conferences were where people went to find out what was happening?
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, I went interviewed for the job, got the job, and the role was going into the city, into the financial district in London, interviewing executives around what are the hot topics. And that's when I thought, wow, this is what I want to do next. So yes, I want to do the MBA, but international finance, like I just loved it. I love the creativity. I thought that the people in the industry were really clever. And so towards the end of those 2 years, I then applied to do a full-time MBA, and hubby and I moved back to Washington for 2 years. So that was kind of another pivot that enabled me to get into banking. So after 2 years, I said, okay, should I look for a job in Washington, New York? I think maybe Tokyo was also a financial capital. Dubai was not on the map yet. Singapore wasn't on the map. And of course, there was London. And London, if you remember, the late 80s and I'd say the first half of the 90s, massive amount, particularly Americans from New York City
Hmm.
coming to the UK, coming to London. And that's how we built up the financial expertise. And so I rode that wave, got a role directly, hired directly out of the MBA program to a UK bank. Again, not the established path, right? Number one, most professionals in London who were American came through their US firms. But it was from a guy that I worked with when I was conference manager, and it was a big deal for me to take the job. My family was moving. My other half said he'd leave his job, he'd follow me, sort out his career. So that was, risk taking. So I thought, this is a guy who knows me, works with me. So although I had other invited for other interviews, I really wasn't keen. I thought I've got too much on the line, to do that. So that's how, in a very,
Hmm.
indirect way, got into banking.
And I think there's clearly a theme of being able to plow forward without really knowing what the outcome's going to be, but doing it in a measured way, which is this will get me somewhere. And then you go, oh, actually, I can pivot to that because now I'm interested in that, but in a very measured way, which I really like. And clearly a tenacity. I love the fact that you just rocked up in Cologne with a job and somewhere to live, but not actually the thing you were going there to do. And I just think that just the presence of mind to do that and the confidence at a young age is amazing. Now, I'm sure during this you'll tell us a little bit more about your story and what you do today versus what you did in banking. But if I can take you back to your 18-year-old self who, had at 18, I'm terrible with ages with high school in the US. At 18, had you already been to Europe as an au pair?
I had been to so I had lived in Sweden. So I think that was 16 to 17. And 18 is kind of junior. Maybe I got that wrong. I'm thinking 18 is when you start university. So that would have
Mhm.
been sophomore year. So maybe Germany was more like 20. No, pardon me. Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay.
Junior year was more like 20. Um, because then after that, I finished university and I was like 21 slash going on
Yeah.
22.
So if I take you back to that 18-year-old self, she clearly had an interest in languages already, had gone for extra credits at high school. If she could see you now, what would she recognize?
She would recognize the same person in terms of um, taking risk in a measured way, as you say, without knowing the outcome. But there was no way that she could have ever imagined what what that future would look like.
Yeah.
I had no context, right? I had absolutely no context. It would be like Back to the Future. Like it would be so foreign to her.
And so is that the thing that would blow her away, that you live in London, you've lived around the world, you live in London, you've moved into banking, then you moved out again, you run your own business. Like, what's the thing that would literally be like, oh my God, amazing?
Unimaginative. All those things would be unimaginative. And of course, then on top of that, you have the technology, right? So I did all this um, through the post, through writing letters, uh, right? Even when I was looking for the job, when I finished my MBA, I actually wrote letters to the people that I had been in contact with, saying, okay, now, we met when I worked in London. I'm finishing the MBA in international finance. Would love to have a conversation about, what you're up to, and your organization. And enclosed just as a way of background. Here's my CV, and I will ring you in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks time, I actually called people. There were, fax, fax was like the new technology. So, it wasn't even emailing. So when I think about that, and same thing with getting the Rotary Scholarship, this is all analog stuff.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's kind of below so millennials and beyond have no concept of that, right? Because they grew up in, I remember having to go to the yellow pages to look something up and find someone's
Yes.
telephone number. And
Yes.
also, you used to be able to ring up 123 and they'd give you the time, which I do miss, to be honest, although I do have a mobile phone. So I think the tenacity you'd have to have and the organization is very different to today. I think that it's a different skill set, isn't it? So I think you should probably definitely be blown away by the technology and how quickly the world works, and even the fact that you're on a thing called a podcast, right? Um,
Exactly. The whole, Zoom, and obviously that's even a change for us post the
mm,
pandemic, how common, and this is an acceptable way of doing business, right?
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it is so different. I mean, I remember you talk about the yellow pages. I remember using the yellow pages to identify which airlines flew to Europe and ringing them to book a ticket.
Yeah, before you could just go into a compare site and it tell you which was the best place to go to buy the tickets. Yeah, it's a whole different world, isn't it? Whole different world.
Exactly.
Um, Along that journey, you must have had to make some big decisions, especially when you pivoted out of banking. So, can you tell the listeners a little bit about the pivot you did when you went to work for yourself, write your book, and along with that, kind of what was the best decision that you've made during your journey?
Um, so the pivot, so in banking, so all told, I think I was in banking a little under 20 years, moved from a marketing sales role, short-term money market product, into a business management role, which evolved into a COO role. Um, and where I was managing director for sort of I think 6 years, and member of the exec committee. So reached a really senior level. And I love my time at banking. I love the individuals. The guy that hired me was a terrific boss. He taught me a lot. And this is before the days that we talked about, you know, diversity, and also I had two and then three kids. And my boss is like, you can handle that. Like he would always be throwing new challenges at me. When the financial crisis came in 2008, the culture of banking became really difficult. Survival mode. I saw lot of bad behaviors. Um, and then sort of 2 years after that, so 2010, I was asked to talk at the launch of a women's network and at the bank I was working at. And it was like, well, a couple questions. What's a woman's network? So here I was all these years, just head in the sand, really,
Yeah.
not, I got used to being the only woman in the room. So, and I said, well, why me? Why should I be giving this talk at the launch of this network? And they said, well, you're a female managing director and you have a family. We want to know how you did it. I was like, did what? Like, what are you talking about? So that was a pivotal moment for me because I realized, so the answer to the question was whatever I learned at work, I would bring at home and vice versa. So that kind of holistic approach. And I talked about this and talked about some of that skill switch. And at that event, a voice in my head said, Christine, this is what you need to be doing next. So that's what kind of prompted this next pivot. And I didn't jump into it right away. I took the summer off and the risk taking, so little older than, little less like thinking back, what I've done, now, what I did back then, probably not. And so what what made me then have the courage to take another pivot was I heard my kid's voice in my head, like, Mom, you tell us to take risks and to step up. Like, you got to step up. So it was really that experience. I thought, okay, I've got to give this a go. So I thought I'm gonna write a book based on that talk that I did, and from that book, launch a business where my mission is to help women advance their careers and create the shape of their career in the way that they want it, right? So shaping, again, creating their paths. And that was, Sam, I think that was the most difficult transition because I went from being nearly 2 decades on a trading floor environment to being by myself,
Hmm.
um, and not having, I no longer have a PA. I don't have a technology department. I don't have a marketing department. It was really hard, and one of my
Mm.
battles, I mean, I was near tears just dealing with the technology, understanding at home what a modem is, right?
Yeah.
You're laughing because I'm sure with your recent pivot you can
Oh,
relate.
Oh, about 2 weeks in, I sat and cried at my desk because I couldn't get my laptop to do something. I was like, "What have I done? Like, I don't know how to do this." And I think everybody has that moment if you've been in a massive corporate where we might judge how quickly stuff happens, but stuff does just happen. And then to have to be CTO, CEO, chief operating officer, head of finance, bookkeeper, team maker, yeah, it's a hell of a shock, isn't it, when you step out of that world?
A real shock, a real shock. And I'd say the first 6 months were the hardest. And then after 6 months, particularly when I started moving into a marketing phase, I thought, hold on a second, I know how to do this. So although it was a different, product per se, I knew how to, position the value proposition. I knew how to build relationships. So there was so much that I then thought, okay, there was a lot I had to learn to get to this point, but I'm not starting with a blank sheet. I've got all these skills. So yeah, by far that's been the most difficult transition, career wise. And now
Mm.
I would even say the other thing is when you're in that routine, I would say it took me 3 years for my body to get into the new rhythm. Like I would actually wake up to take the 6:30 train, right? It was crazy. And then I would be at my desk at like 7 o'clock. Like, why am I at my desk at 7 o'clock? Right. So then I realized, okay, well, what? Okay, I don't have that anymore. What do I have? Okay, I now have time in the morning that's when I can do my health routine. I was running and now I'm real keen cyclist. So I, cycle every morning. And so I was able to, to then create a different environment. And the other thing
Mm.
was I would lose track of time being in my office by myself. So I then learned to organize my diary so that at least a couple days a week I'm going into London. I have calls, really mixing it around. And then using my timer on my phone. I was missing meetings. Like, oh my God, because nobody was telling me where to go, right? Yeah, it was really, really crazy. And then at the 3 year mark, that I'm being completely honest here. At the 3 year mark, I thought, I'm unemployable. I can never work for somebody else.
Well, Christine, I'm impressed it took you 3 years. It took me about 3 months. I worked out very quickly that although it's challenging being a founder, it's so much more fun than doing what someone else tells you to do. Um, and so on that journey, if you think about your journey from the early days as a teenager, having the tenacity and self knowledge that you wanted to study extra credits for languages, through to rocking up at the German embassy in Washington, to doing an MBA, moving around the world for a job, sending those letters and following up, through to what you do now. Is there one best decision that you can think of? Is there one of those decisions that you think, that has been the anchor for everything that I am?
It's a difficult question, but I think the answer is the decision to go to university in the first place. In Sweden, I received news that I'd been accepted into Georgetown. My older sister called me, and I said, "Well, sis, I'm not sure. It's a lot of money, and I
Mm.
can just hop into other countries and learn other languages." Like, and she was the one and she went to university for a week and dropped out. She was the one that said, Chris, this is a really good university. This is an
Mm.
opportunity. And she's the one that had the conversation with my parents to say, let's, we need to figure out the finances here. So I nearly didn't go to university.
Wow.
I've always been, so even when I went to Sweden, I've always been a saver. I've always been very independent. So instead of even going to Sweden, I received a small amount, but I received some money from the Rotary Club for expenses. I did cleaning. So I had like quote pocket money. And then in Germany, I was well into profit because I had I was being received some money from the family as an au pair, and then I did tutoring, not only the kids in the family, which was part of the whole package, but um, the cleaner, the housekeeper for the family. She had a son who needed help with English, and then at university, I posted something that I could tutor in English. So I mean, it was amazing. So instead of it costing me money, I actually left, finished with making money. Um, so I was always been very conscious, like, is that is that money worth, is that investment
Mm.
worth it? Um, and then I would say, going to Georgetown, it completely opened up so many doors. And what I say is, it's not so much the knowledge. I was taught how to think and how
Yeah.
to question, and that is so relevant, in 2026, we're in the age of AI and all these tools. That's not the valuable part. The valuable part is being able to critical thinking and
Yeah.
analyzing, and then the whole humanity piece, working with others and the creativity. And so it opened up doors to areas that I had not been exposed to. So with a liberal arts program, learning about, certain history and theology and sociology, it just made me a much broader person. And that in
Mm.
a way provided a platform. For me, the MBA enabled me to pivot into banking. And I learned definitely technical skills and also conflict management. Like conflict management, I built a whole banking career on conflict management. So, but if I, to answer your question, I think that initial undergraduate program really provided an incredible foundation to
Mm.
to build on.
And as you say, just the opening your eyes to that wider world as well, and the possibilities and the different people and the different way people think. And I think that learning, irrelevant of whether it's in formal education or not, I think grounds and forms a lot of us. I'm sure you've been given lots of advice over the years. You've probably given lots of advice as well. What advice have you been given that, in retrospect, was good advice, but you didn't pay any attention to?
I struggle with this question because the things that I remember is just getting so much bad advice. Um, Even so, obviously, at in high school, I'm wasting my time on foreign languages. Also, applying to university, you should apply. Back then, it was minimum three
Yeah.
universities, your top choice, a likely one, and then a shoe-in. And I applied, right? And I was like, I don't want the other two. I only want that one, right? And then even when I was moving to the UK, I had a friend say to me, I don't understand why you're taking this job in London. Your husband has a good job. I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? We were as a couple, like we worked this out. So just time and time again in my life, it was like, and I think people aren't saying giving bad advice because they're bad people, right? I think part of it is their own fear and how
Mm-hmm.
they're seeing that
Yeah.
their fear. So I'm saying this with humility. I certainly am not perfect in any way, but there's nothing that stands out for me, Sam, in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like, gosh, if I only listened, if I only listened to that,
Yeah.
it would be different.
Yeah. And I think that's quite common, because I think advice is more about the person giving it than the person getting it.
Yes.
And so it's advice
Yes.
that they would potentially want to get based on their knowledge, experience versus what the actual person needs. And I think, given who you are, and you said right at the beginning, driven, your dad was an entrepreneur and clearly taught you to take risks from a very early age, that actually you wouldn't rely on other people's advice because you wanted to learn yourself and then navigate through from that point of view. And therefore, I love the fact that, I mean, I can't imagine someone in a school going, no, don't do any extra work on languages. I mean, that just blows my mind, full stop. Because any teacher who gets a kid who wants to do more would be like, yes, wonderful. So that's hilarious. And it framed your life so much doing that. So I think that's very much on who you are. I like to ask each of our guests each week to set a personal challenge for our listeners, based on the things that have benefited them in their lives. So if you could set a personal challenge to our listeners, Christine, what would it be?
My challenge would be to answer the question, what do you really want? And what's holding you back from going for it?
I love it.
That's my
Yeah.
challenge.
Yeah. And I think it's a really difficult one for all of us, right? That's not an easy one to sit back and reflect on, because sometimes what we really want, it's quite a scary thing to aim for.
Yes. Yeah. And that thing about, failure. And I would say one of the things, and you frame this really, really well, one of the things that I struggle with even now is when, I hear others say, well, that was a failure for you, or that didn't, work. And I'm thinking, I didn't see it that way. I learned, right? I learned something. I mean, simple things, even as cooking. I was the worst cook, but I really had a desire to eat well and whatever. And now I'm quite a good cook. And however, I can't bake. I don't have any experience baking. And when I've tried to bake, it has been a disaster. My daughter said to me, Mom, you know what? That's why you're so successful, because you're okay with things not working out. And I said, that's how I learn.
But I think, that what a healthy attitude to learning. And actually, I think that there's clearly something in whether it's your upbringing or your lived experience, that lack of fear of failing and not even thinking about it as failure, like not even failure not being an option, because you're like, well, whether it worked out the way I wanted to or not, it taught me something and therefore I've moved to the next thing. Very few people have that, I think. And I think that's something that you may not recognize in yourself as being quite unique, but actually very few people have that presence of mind to just react with positivity to any situation.
Yeah, so that's why I say, what's holding you back, go for it. And by going for it, you're just going to be on a great journey. You're going to learn so
Mm,
much, right?
yeah, absolutely. So we're at our final question, and we've learned so much about you and your journey today. So thank you. And obviously, the podcast is called A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown Up. So I ask everybody to share with us, if you could put one thing in the beginner's guide, what would it be?
I think I would go for, it's a tough question. I think I would go for don't be afraid of conflict. Conflict is a great opportunity, for the learning to get to a new place, to get to an answer that you had envisaged, to take a relationship to the next level. I found this in banking that when I, um, when I approached somebody about a difficult situation, I always did it with respect, always one on one. And whenever I did that, we then there was just more respect for one another, and that
Hmm.
relationship went to another level, which would not have been possible had I not faced the whatever the issue was, head on. So although it's difficult, I think that it's where the growth is, personally and professionally. And this is I'm speaking also candidly, in my personal life. Like, there's always conflict, but you can't ignore it. You have to work through it. So that would be my entry into the guide.
And I think a wonderful entry, because I think you're right. I think we learn more with the stuff that's a little bit harder than we do the stuff that's easier. We learn more when things doesn't go right, whether it's baking
Yeah,
or having a difficult conversation with a boss on a trading floor, whatever. We learn much more from that, and then you know what to do next time. You can navigate it better
right.
the next time, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So fantastic, and a brilliant insight into some of the things you've learned over your career, and your journeys around the world. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today, and I've really enjoyed listening to your story, learning more, and getting your insight. So, thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown Up. Please do like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we will be joined by Sarah Bennett Nash. Sarah's going to talk to us about her international career, what took her to the States in her early 20s, which really kicked it off, and the impact her dad had on her life decisions, especially losing him in her 20s. So please do join us to listen. And in the meantime, enjoy being a grown up.